Has anyone ever left you, right when you needed them the most? Not during a fight, not after things got complicated, but during the moment when you were completely broken, when you had nothing left to give, when you were just trying to survive one day at a time, and the person who promised to stay quietly packed up and chose someone easier. If that has happened to you, this story is for you, and I need you to stay until the end. Because what happened to Emma after he left changed everything she believed about pain, about people, and about herself. Emma was 27 when her mother was diagnosed. Stage 3. Aggressive. The kind of diagnosis that rearranges every single priority in your life overnight. She remembers the exact moment she got the call. She was at her desk at work. The fluorescent light suddenly felt too bright, her hands went cold, and everything around her, the noise, the movement, her colleagues, became completely silent. She called Ryan first. They had been together for 2 years. He was the person she called when things were good, when things were funny, when she needed someone to share a meal with on a Tuesday night just because. So it made complete sense that he would be the first person she called when her world stopped. He answered on the second ring. She told him through a voice she barely recognized as her own. He said, "Oh no, that's really hard. I'm so sorry." And then he said he had to go. He was in the middle of something. She told herself he was just in shock, that he'd call back, that he'd show up. He didn't call back that night. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Emma's life. Hospital visits, treatment plans she didn't understand, but nodded along to anyway. Watching her mother, the woman who had held her whole world together, look smaller in a hospital bed than Emma had ever seen her look. Ryan was still there. Technically, he'd text. Sometimes. He'd ask how things were going with a brevity that felt like a checkbox, like he was completing a task called being a supportive boyfriend, rather than actually being one. When Emma needed to cry, he'd go quiet. When she needed to talk through her fear, he'd change the subject. When she asked him to come to the hospital with her just once, he said he wasn't good with medical stuff. It made him uncomfortable. Emma said, "Okay." She always said okay. 3 months in, Ryan asked to talk. They sat in his apartment, the same apartment where she had spent hundreds of evenings feeling safe. He told her, carefully, gently, like he'd rehearsed it, that he felt like things had been really heavy lately, that he cared about her, but he wasn't sure he could be what she needed right now, that he thought maybe some space would be good. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Space. Her mother was in chemotherapy. Emma hadn't slept more than 4 hours in weeks. She had been carrying grief and fear and hospital schedules and the weight of pretending to be okay at work every single day. And he needed space. She didn't cry in front of him. She said, "Okay," and she left. The weeks after Ryan left were a different kind of hard, because now Emma was carrying 2 griefs at the same time. The grief of her mother's illness, which was real and large and had no clear ending, and the grief of losing the person she thought would stand beside her through it. And the strange, disorienting thing about the second grief was this: she wasn't even sure she was allowed to feel it. Everyone around her understood the first one. Her friends would ask about her mother with soft voices and kind eyes. Her colleagues gave her grace when she seemed distracted. But when she mentioned Ryan, when she admitted that he had left, the response she kept getting was a version of the same thing. "You're going through so much already. Maybe it's for the best. You don't need that stress." As if his leaving was a gift. As if losing the person she loved was something to be grateful for, because now she had one less thing to think about. Nobody said, "I'm so sorry that the person who was supposed to stay chose to leave during the worst moment of your life. That is a real loss. That deserves real grief." And so Emma carried it quietly. She visited her mother 3 times a week. She worked, she ate, she slept when she could. And at night, in the silence of her apartment, she sat with a grief that had no name and no permission. The grief of being left by someone who was supposed to love her when loving her was hardest. 6 months later, her mother finished treatment. The scans came back clear. Emma sat in the hospital car park for 45 minutes after the appointment and cried harder than she had cried through any of it. Not from sadness, from relief so massive it had nowhere to go but out. And in that moment, alone in that car park, she noticed something. She had done it She had gone through the hardest months of her life without falling apart, without being rescued, without the person she thought she needed. She had shown up for her mother every single time. She had held her own life together while her world was unstable. She had survived something that she genuinely didn't know if she could survive. And she had done all of it, alone. Not because she wanted to, because she had to. Here is what I want to tell you about what Emma experienced, and what science says about people who go through exactly this. In the 1990s, two psychologists, Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, began studying something that traditional psychology had almost entirely ignored. Not trauma, not the damage that crisis leaves behind, but what happens after the damage, what grows in the space that pain carves open. They called it post-traumatic growth, and their research found something that fundamentally changes how we understand suffering. When a person goes through a crisis that completely shatters their existing assumptions about the world, about safety, about love, about who will be there, and they survive it, they don't just return to who they were before. They become someone their previous self could not have imagined. Specifically, Tedeschi and Calhoun found 5 areas where people who experience post-traumatic growth consistently change. They discover personal strength they didn't know they had. They develop deeper, more meaningful relationship because they now know who shows up and who doesn't. They experience a profound shift in life priorities. The things that used to feel important simply stop mattering. They develop a great appreciation for life, not in a cliché way, but in a bone-deep way that changes how they move through ordinary days. And they report a heightened sense of spiritual or existential clarity, a knowing, quiet, and unshakable about what they are made of. Emma experienced all 5, but here is the part that matters most. None of this would have happened if Ryan had stayed, not because his leaving was good. It wasn't. It was a real abandonment, and it caused real pain, and it deserved real grief. But because the version of Emma that existed when Ryan was there, the one who said okay to everything, who made herself smaller so he could feel more comfortable, who confused his presence with safety, that version of Emma would never have discovered what she was actually capable of. Ryan leaving didn't make Emma stronger. Going through the hardest months of her life and coming out the other side, that made her stronger. His absence just meant she had to find out alone. There is something else I want to say directly to anyone listening who has been left during their worst season. The person who left you during your hardest time was not built for the depth of what you are. That is not a cruel thing to say, it is simply true. Some people are only capable of loving the easy version of you. The light version, the version